It is the case that 39 years ago, I was driving around this whole area, praying for the area. God just laid on my heart. And I was by myself driving, and I was coming from east going west. And as I came up to this piece of property, I just felt compelled to stop. And when I stopped and I just looked over at the fields over here in this area, empty fields, I in my mind's eye, I could see you. Now, I couldn't see all your faces, but I believed that God had just laid on my heart a vision to see a people who would gather on this lot of land, on this field, and praise God and serve the community and make a difference in the lives of others. It was about a month, it was probably the next week, I talked to a realtor I knew, and I said, hey, I drove by a piece of property. There's no sign on it. It's not apparently for sale or anything, but I just feel like God laid that on my heart. And so he checked on it, and he said, yeah, no, it's not for sale. He said, but you know who the owner is. I said, no, I have no idea who the owner is. He says, no, you know who the owner is because you used to be his neighbor years ago, back in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s, very early 70s and 60s. You were his neighbor. I said, really? And so he tells me who. And he said, I talked to him and he'll sell it to you. And we bought this piece of property for $6,000. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, it's amazing. So we purchased this. But see, what God was doing 39 years ago was he was birthing something, and it sometimes it takes time. That's hard on me. It's hard. I don't like waiting. When I decide on something, I want it yesterday. Not today, yesterday. But God's worked on me. And 39 years later, guess what? God chose you. He chose you. And he's up to something. And I believe that God is going to fulfill what God had envisioned in a mind's eye nearly 40 years ago, 39 years ago. God is doing something. I want to read to you out of John chapter 6 and the story of what occurs out of the life of Jesus. And many of you will remember the story. It's John chapter 6, and I'm going to read verse 5 and 6 in the New Living Translation. It says this, Jesus saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. By the way, forgive me. I'm going to interrupt just a second. Are you okay for a second? Because my bride is sitting here, and I failed to mention my bride, Arlene. And it's important I do that because I like tacos, and she's really good at making those things. So Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. Turning to Philip, he asked, where can we buy bread to feed all these people? He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. That's incredible about God. He already knew what he was going to do. Have you ever said these words? I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no idea what I'm going to do. Boy, yeah, I've said that a bunch of times. Not only have I said that a bunch of times, I've even at times come to a different conclusion as well, where I would say under my breath, because I'm a pastor and you're supposed to be, you're supposed to really have your act together, but how many times have I even said, I don't even know what God's going to do. I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. I wish I did. And suddenly you have this uncertainty that just kind of boils up in you. And when uncertainty boils up in you, it really kind of wreaks havoc on your ability to walk with any sense of confidence. You just feel weak and you feel like, oh man, you're getting beat down and you feel like you're losing or somehow in life. And you just don't have the confidence that you feel like you need to really succeed and go forward in life. Uncertainty can do that to you, and you kind of get to this place where you're feeling like, I don't know what I'm going to do, and I don't even know what God is going to do. But John tells us this story. And John tells us the story in which Jesus, he recognizes a huge crowd of people out there in front of him. Huge group of people. And he looks over at Philip, one of his disciples, and he asks Philip a question. Now, what's interesting about that is when he asks the question to Philip, John then later on figures it out. So when he writes all this up, he puts in his little note. He says, but he already knew what he was going to do. He asked the question, but Jesus already knew what he was going to do. You know, one of the things about church and church life as churches, 45 years of being a pastor, one of the things that is a reality is that all of us as churches spend a significant amount of energy and time trying to develop or understand what we're supposed to do. We call it our mission. What is our mission? What are we supposed to do? The good news and the reality of it is that Jesus already knows. He already knows. He knew 39 years ago what was going to be happening here. I couldn't see it. All I could is by faith kind of envision what God might be, that God would want to do something here, but God already knew what he was going to do. And he already knows what he's going to do after today and next week and next year. God already knows what he's going to do. And by the way, not only does he already know what he's going to do, he chooses you. He has chosen you to be a part of what he's going to do. I think, okay, here's this mission. I don't know what I'm going to do, but God already knows what he's going to do. And our mission really is to really understand what God is up to and begin to cooperate with that. For if we cooperate with God, what can we not accomplish? There's nothing. We can accomplish anything if we cooperate with what God is up to. So Jesus sees this huge crowd of people, and he asks Philip a question. Now, John again reminds us, he already knew what he's going to do, so he asked Philip the question. He says, Philip, where can we buy bread to feed all these people? He already knew what he was going to do. Why does he ask Philip? Because he knows Philip. And the good news is, he knows all of you. He knows what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, who is this goofball that Pastor Ben had come up here? Whatever's in your heart, whatever's in your mind, whatever you're thinking, God already knows. And he knows what he's going to do. So he asked Philip. And see, the reason he asked Philip, because he knew that Philip is the practical analyzer. He knows that Philip, when Jesus says, hey, where can we buy bread to feed all these people? Philip's going to go, well, let's see here. Boy, there's probably like there's probably at least 5,000 men out there. And if you multiply that by the amount that it costs for a lunch these days, and you divide that by how much a normal monthly wage is, why, it's going to take half a year's wages to feed all these people. So he's thinking, he analyzes all this, and then in my mind, I can see him come up to Jesus, put his hands on Jesus' shoulder and face Jesus and say, Jesus, look, Jesus, listen to me. You have such a good heart. Man, you got a great heart. But listen, my friend, you're asking the wrong question. It's not the right question. Because the reality of it is, Jesus, man, I'm so good. I'm so grateful for your heart. You're so good-hearted. This is why we love you so much. But no, the question really should be, do we have enough money to buy lunch for all these people? Because it ain't going to matter where we can get the bread if we can't buy it. So you're premature on the question, and the answer is, Jesus, no. Thank you so much for caring. Thank you for your good heart. But no, we can't buy the bread. We don't have enough money for it. So we can't do it. Now there's another one of the Lord's disciples. He's standing nearby. His name's Andrew. He's the brother of Peter. And Andrew then, he's listening because the crowd of people are all around. They're pressing in. People want to get near Jesus. As we know stories in the Bible, some of them just simply want to be able to touch him in hopes of something happening in their lives. People are pressing in all over the place. His disciples are around him, kind of trying to give him a little space. And so Andrew's right there, and Andrew responds to what he hears between Jesus and Philip. And I think that when Andrew responds, Andrew's being a little bit playfully sarcastic. He's giving some playful sarcasm in his answer because he doesn't believe any more than Philip does that there's any way they're going to be able to feed all these people. But you know what? He's a good sport and he's kind of playful and so he says, Jesus, there's this kid right here. This little guy, he's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Hey, it's a start. 5,000 people, but hey, it's a start. And I think the Bible doesn't tell us this, but I can imagine in my mind's ear hearing Andrew then say, kind of snickering and saying, but my brother Peter could wolf that down in one meal. And Peter kind of cracks up and says, I'm going to need twice that much. I'm feeling hungry today. And all the disciples are just kind of laughing because they don't believe. And this is craziness. There's no way he's going to feed these amount of people. But what does Jesus do? It's a very simple response. He looks at his boys and he says, okay, fellas, I get it. Hey, tell everybody to sit down. Just have everybody sit down. Here's how it reads out. In John chapter 6, verses 10 through 15, Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. The response of Jesus is simple. Hey, just tell the guys, tell them all to sit down. While the disciples are busy getting people seated, Jesus turns his attention to this little kid in the story, this little guy. And just a little guy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And for me, I love this kid. This kid really is a boy after my own heart. He's just a kid standing there with his lunch pail, listening to all the adults, trying to act like adults and figure out the problem and try to work the problem and see if they can come up with an answer. And their conclusion is pretty small. They can't do it. No, it's not possible. He's just this little guy listening in, paying attention to this thing. Now, I love this kid, and he reminds me of one of the boys you'll see here on the screen here. This is what I think standing around. Just a bunch of these characters standing around, and you got this one little pudgy kid that Andrew sees standing there. He's got his lunch bucket under his arm, a couple of fish hanging out, and some pieces of bread in his pockets, and he's standing there, and he's munching on a chunk of licorice, and he's just wide-eyed watching the adults try to do their thing, and he's just listening in. And he doesn't really think he's going to become a part of the story. He's not getting it. He doesn't see that he's going to be in it. And yet, Jesus sees him. That's who Jesus sees. The 12, they see the crowd and the impossibility of the crowd. Jesus sees one little guy hanging on to a piece of licorice and some bread and fish. And he's just watching the story. Well, see, what the boy doesn't know is that he is going to be on the front end of an incredible miracle, that God is going to use him. He doesn't know it. He doesn't see it. But Jesus, according to John, Jesus already knew what he was going to do. He already knew this. And so he's going to use this boy. So I want to just share with you a couple of observations this morning. The first observation is this: God often uses the least to accomplish the most. This is, all through the Bible. It doesn't matter where you start in the Bible. You don't have to read very long before you discover that God often uses the very least to accomplish the most. That's the way God operates. And so he doesn't need all the adults there. He just decided to use this one boy. Now, Philip wasn't the answer. Andrew, he wasn't the answer. No. Peter and John, they weren't the answer. The 12 disciples combined, corporately, they weren't the answer. Nope. The bread maker in the nearest town, he wasn't the answer. Nope. This little boy is the one that Jesus decided to choose. He said, I choose you. I want you to help me out. You see, often God does use the least to accomplish the most. We tend to look at anything we're facing. If you consider what you as an individual right now are facing in life, and you think about the size of what it is. For some of you, you're kind of facing some difficult stuff. Some of you, it was back then. Some of you, you got some stuff in front of you that you don't know is yet out there. But you're faced with stuff that is, I don't know what I'm going to do kind of size stuff. I don't know. I don't know what God's going to do kind of stuff. God already knows. He's completely certain about what he will do. But what we tend to do is we look at what we're faced with through the lens of our lack of or little bit of faith. Now, what is faith? We define faith this way. Faith is simply this. Faith is simply trusting God enough to do what he says. That's it. Just simply trust God enough to do what he says. We know what the definition of grace is. Grace is unmerited favor. It's undeserved. It's unearned. It's not because God looked at me and said, wow, I need what you got. No, wasn't it that at all. I earned nothing. God didn't give me what I deserved gratefully, because what I deserved was nothing above hell's fires. But God looked at me and said, I choose you. I wouldn't have chosen me, but God did, and I'm grateful to him that he did. But we oftentimes look through the lens of our lack of faith, of our inability, of our fears, our worries and anxieties to simply trust him enough to do what he says. That's what faith is. Take that definition, put it anywhere you see the word faith. Simply trust God enough to do what he says, and you'll see that it fits. That's what faith is. But we have trouble sometimes just simply doing what God says. In the Old Testament, we read a story that you, I'm sure, are well familiar with. It's the story of Israel. They're there now in the Promised Land, and they want a king. They want to be like everybody else in the land. And so they go to Samuel the prophet and they say, Samuel, we want a king. How come we don't get a king? We want a king like everybody else has a king. And Samuel says, what are you talking about? You got a king. In fact, you got the King of Kings. There's nobody like him. You got a king. And they said, no, we get all that. Yeah, hey, thanks God. We get all that. We want to be like everybody else, and we want to have a king like everybody else has a king. Samuel goes to God and says, I'm sorry, God, but the people have lost their marbles. And God says, yeah, I know. The people do, and they will do for generations to come. They're going to keep losing their marbles, So listen, let's just do this. You tell them I said, okay, go choose a king. So they go. They choose a king. And when they choose a king, they find the biggest, baddest man they can find in the land. Saul, the Bible says, is head and shoulders bigger than everybody else. Certainly, he has all the appearances of being the right king. You can't go wrong with a guy that's king that's that big. No. This is the right king. They choose him. Well, Saul starts off okay, but pretty soon, like all of us kind of can get very easily, suddenly Saul gets impressed with his own power and giftedness and abilities and the way that people respect him and look up to him and all the things. And he's starting to feel pretty good about himself. And what happens when he starts really, really feeling good about himself? He starts forgetting that it's God who brings all good things to us. I can look at my life, and throughout the entirety of my life, every good thing that has ever come to me, that's ever passed through my life, that's ever come to my life, had nothing to do with me. Nothing. It was all because of the goodness of God, His unmerited favor to me, His grace. His grace. In fact, that Ben and Angie were on staff with me years ago. I look back at that all the time and I say, how did that happen? What an incredible blessing to me. I learned way more from him than he will have ever learned from me. I just think, man, God, I can't. Every good thing that God has ever done for me had nothing to do with me. It was God. It was God. And Saul forgot that. And so one day he is faced with a decision. Is he going to live by faith, simply trust God enough to do what he says? Or is he going to just take matters in his own hands? He decided to ignore what Samuel the prophet told him that God said he should do. He decided to ignore that, and he got ahead of God, and he took matters into his own hands. God wasn't impressed. And the reality of it was that failure occurred. And Saul's life began to go like this rather than like this. And God said to Samuel, look, okay, the folks chose a guy. They thought he was the right guy, but now I'm going to choose a guy. I want you, Samuel, to go to Jesse, the house of Jesse, because I'm going to anoint one of his sons to be king over the nation of Israel. So Samuel goes and he says, Jesse, hey, can you bring out your boys? Hey, God's going to anoint one of them king. And Jesse's like, cool. All right. Yeah, buddy, let's do it. So what's he do? He does his natural thing. He brings the first, the oldest. He's the biggest. He's the most experienced. He's the most gifted. He is the guy who will become the head of Jesse's clan when Jesse is gone. This is the boy. He brings him out, and Jesse's feeling really good. He's pretty impressive, isn't he, Samuel? This is a good boy. He is a really fine boy. And Samuel says, nope. Hit the buzzer. Gone. Out of here. Bring the next one. Next one comes. Yep, nope, not him. Next one comes. Nope, not him. Next one comes. Nope, not him. 7 boys in a row. How many of you have had 7 boys in a row in your family, given birth to? Wow, that'd be a lot, wouldn't it? 7 boys in a row. And every single time, Samuel says, nah, not that one. Nope, not that one. Brings in the 7th one, and Samuel says, nope, not that one. And Jesse's like, well, I don't know what to tell you then. And Samuel says, well, Jesse, you must have someone else. He says, well, yeah, but he's the youngest. He's just this little puny kid. He's out in the fields watching the sheep. No, he wouldn't be the one. And Samuel said, well, I don't know. Bring him in here. And in walks a young boy named David. And God said, I choose him. I choose him. You guys thought you were so smart. You wanted to go all one of these 7. I choose him. And that little guy, David, God anointed king. And when that happened, there came a day in the life of David still as a boy. His dad says, hey, look, all your brothers are off, in the camp of Israel. Saul's got them all over there. They're ready to fight the Philistines. They don't have any food. They're hungry. I want you to put your lunch pails under your arms. Take all these guys some lunch. Get them something to eat. So David walks into camp. He's got a bucket load of bread and fish and whatever, and he's taking them in there to his brothers, and he notices that there's this weird atmosphere in camp. They're defeated. There's a lot of uncertainty. Nobody wants to go down in the valley because the Philistines have put down their champion, the giant, in there, and the big call is, well, you send somebody to fight him, and if whoever wins between the two of them, they win the war. We'll spare everybody else's lives. That's the way the devil works. He always lies. How many really believe that the Philistines were going to lay down their weapons and never, ever fight Israel again if they defeated Goliath? No. They ran that day because they were scared to death. But they show up again, because the devil always lies. He promises things that he never comes through on. But David, he sees all this, and David can't figure it out. He's thinking, what is wrong with people? Somebody needs to go down there and shut that giant's mouth, because that guy is voicing stuff against God and God's army, and you don't get away with that. Somebody needs to go down there and take care of business. I'd put it in these words. We sang it this morning. In David, there was a sling in this boy's voice and a stone in his praise. He said, are you kidding me? God will give us the power over this guy. He went down there, sling and stone in hand, and took care of business. You see, nobody looked at the boy. Everybody was looking for somebody that had all the goods to make it happen. But nobody seemed like the right person. God chose what no one else would choose. He takes the least, and he does the most. Jesus sees a little boy, budgy little guy with a stained shirt and his lunch pail and a piece of licorice, standing there watching all the adults. And Jesus says, I'll take you. I'll take you. Observation number 2 is this: God uses unlikely partners. He uses unlikely partners. He will use oftentimes the very people that others may think incapable or unworthy. They're incapable, they're unworthy. What happened to this boy? Well, this little guy, I love really what happens. You can't really see it, but and you can kind of play the movie out in your mind. What could have happened is when the disciples start sitting everybody down, and they're doing, Jesus could have gone like this with a smile to the boy. And the boy could have just grabbed a hold of his peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and just squeezed them a little harder. No, you ain't getting my sandwiches. And the peanut butter and the jelly is kind of starting to smush out, and he's holding on for dear life. But that's not what happened. He didn't do that. When Jesus said, hey, buddy, hey, can I borrow your fish and your bread here for a minute? The little guy just simply gave it to him. Just simply gave it to him. And then he watched as Jesus took the pieces of bread and began to break the bread. I mean, Jesus had to be a machine. How do you break enough bread for 5,000 people? Just, I don't know how you do it, but I mean, it had to be craziness. He broke off bread for 5,000 people and sliced up enough fish out of the 2 fish to feed 5,000 people. And then the little boy's watching this, and his eyes are getting bigger and bulgier, and the stain on his shirt is getting bigger, and he's thinking, wow, this is great. And he sits down, and he eats too, and his buddies all eat with him, and they're all yapping, talking about what a great thing they're witnessing. And then suddenly they're bringing back basketfuls of food, and they're setting them at this kid's feet, and the kid is starting to drool now. He's getting pretty excited about this, and he's telling his buddies, look at this, and I'm going to need help. And these guys are having to take the 12 baskets home and show mama and daddy what happened. I mean, the Bible doesn't tell us, but something had to happen to those 12 baskets, and this kid is a part of the story. Now, here's the incredible thing. You have to know that boy's life was changed for the rest of his life. He was a different kid from that day on. That boy is never the same. If the Bible would have taken the time, and the Bible says at the end of what John says, look, if I told you everything that happened, I could tell you that this world would be filled with the volumes of the information of all that happened. So I'm just giving you a little sneak peek behind the curtain of what might have happened. This little guy had to have grown up. And in years after he's an adult man, and he's sitting around and he's hearing people talk about, you remember that guy named Jesus? Boy, they crucified him. They say he rose from the dead. And now there's some guys going around preaching this guy's name, and boy, it's kind of creating some stir. That little guy, now grown man, was said, oh, not only did I hear him, I know him. I know him. And not only do I know him, I got to be a part of a great miracle. I was just this pudgy little kid with my lunch bucket, and Jesus looked at me. Nobody else did, but he looked at me and said, hey, buddy, hey, you want to be a part of something really cool? Oh, yeah, sure, I love cool, let's do it. And suddenly, there's all these bread and fish and everything else, and he tells the story. That boy went to his grave as an old man, never forgetting the day that he got to partner with Jesus. The whole of his life, he became a living testimony of what God can do. That's what happened to the boy. That's what happened to him. God chose him. And let me say, God chose you. God chose you. 39 years ago, you were in his mind and in his heart. It doesn't matter where you come from or what you've done or where you've been or how you got here or whatever, but God had you in mind. And God chose you. And God chose me. I was just simply driving up this road. I'm nothing special. Absolutely not. I'm just a young pastor driving up the road, and I feel compelled to stop. And I stop, and I see the land, and I begin to see a vision that God can do something here. And I claim that property for God, and a month later we own the piece of land. God is up to something. God is up to something. All he needs is us. He chooses you. Observation number 2, God uses unlikely partners. God uses unlikely partners. He will use, again, that unworthy people that we will discount, turn away from, but God chooses us. So what are some lessons in that? Here's the lessons. God has prepared you to be his partner. God has prepared you to be his partner. That to me is an incredible thing when I think about it. Because some of you may have ruled yourself out. Others may have ruled you out. You look at everything you've gone through in your life, all the different stuff you've faced, all the times you've been abandoned, rejected, overlooked, not chosen. You know, you think, man, when I was a kid in the playground yard back in the days, and we'd choose the 2 guys who get to pick the teams, they were always the same 2 guys. And those 2 guys always picked the same way. And I was always the last one getting picked kind of thing. You always look at how it's, everybody always overlooking. Always overlooking. And you look at your life, the many times you've been ripped off, the many times you've been talked bad about, the many times people were in your face saying things you didn't deserve, the times you deserved everything they were saying because you know you did things you shouldn't have been doing. All the stuff that you can look at the entirety of your life, and you got this big pile of stuff. And that pile says, nope, reject, can't use. That's not what God says. That's not what God says. God doesn't look at the pile. He looks at you. And he chooses you. He wants you. He wants you. Here's the lie of the devil. The lie of the devil is this: God can't use me. Oh, yes, he can. God can't use me. Oh, yes, he can. God absolutely can use you. You know, and I'm certainly as one. I'm a prime candidate for the fact that God can take stuff that isn't worth using and God can use. Because I'm just a farm boy that grew up at the bottom end of Micah Peak over here out on the farm. I'm just out in the yard shoveling cow poo. You know, that's all I wasn't the, I think when I graduated from Central Valley High School, I think there was like 223 students who graduated my year. I was like 216th in my class. So I don't have a whole lot to be impressed with. There's not a lot here that I can say, oh, impressive. No, I come with little in hand. I would never have chosen me, but God looks at us and says, you know what, I can do something with that. The devil says you can't be used, but God says, yeah. You remember there's another Old Testament story in which you might remember it very well. Balaam and his donkey, and we all know the end result of that story. The end result is if God can use the donkey, then God can certainly use me, right? Here's Balaam, and Balaam, he's getting paid to go curse Israel. This is big bucks. I can use the money. I'm going to go do this thing. And God says, no, you're not. And Balaam says, oh, yeah, I am. I'm getting paid to do this. So he gets on his donkey, and off they go. And Balaam's ignoring God, and so God puts a great big old angel with a fiery sword in the road up in front of him, and the donkey can see what Balaam can't see. He's too blinded by his wanting to get some money and pay and do what he's supposed to do and be okay with the bad guys and everything else. And so he's on his way. And the donkey rears off the road and throws Balaam off. And Balaam's all angry and gets back on him and tries to get him to go. And the donkey's not cooperating. So Balaam gets a big stick and starts whacking on the donkey and beating him. And finally, incredibly, who knew that a donkey could speak Hebrew? I mean, this is amazing. So he speaks in language that Balaam can understand. Might have not been Hebrew, maybe it was Moabitian or something. I don't know what it was. But he speaks in it, and Balaam hears this. And what does the donkey say? He says, dude, I'm just trying to save your life. Give a donkey a break, huh? Help me out here just a little bit. Because you're dead man if you keep going. If God can use a donkey, surely he could use me, a farm boy from the bottom of Micah Peak. He could do that. Surely he can use any of us and all. Forget about the pile of stuff that speaks to how many good things you've done, or how many rotten things you've done, or how many bad things have happened to you, or how many good things have happened, because it's never about that. It's simply about you. It's simply about you. God can use me. Here's the next little lesson. God will use whatever you have. He doesn't need much. Thank God for that, because I don't have much. God will use whatever you have. He doesn't need much. It's a little fifth grade boy in my mind. Here, yeah, Lord, here's my bread and my fish. Take that. How many here have ever known a fifth grade boy? Anybody here have ever known a fifth grade boy? Yeah, one person. Really good. You guys need to get out. How many here? I hope I get a few more hands raised on this one. How many of you here have ever been a fifth grade boy? Yeah. That's a little better. So, I think about fifth grade boys. How many here have ever had to wash the jeans of a fifth grade boy? Put them in the laundry. Yeah. It's kind of an interesting assignment when you have to do that, because one thing you know about fifth grade boys is that if you're going to wash their jeans, you better check their pockets before you put the jeans in the laundry, right? So you can, okay, he's fifth grader, all right, he's a boy, fifth grade, and let's check out the pants. You put your hand in the pocket. Yeah, boy, there's some stuff in there. You pull it out, and here in his pocket, there is a flattened, dried out frog that got ran over on the street from a week ago. He's peeled it off the road, and now it's in his pocket. Along with that dead, flat, dried out frog are 3 live earthworms. And not only that, a half-eaten chicken wing from dinner last night. All in that pocket right there. You reach into his other pocket and you're pulling up just a wide variety of stuff, and you're looking in his pocket and you pull out, what in the world? There are snake bones. There are earplugs, there's a rock, there's a paper clip, there's some melted chocolate candy, there's 3 marbles, and a half-eaten piece of pepperoni stick, and of course a piece of licorice, all there in that pocket. And you look in his back pocket, and there's a slingshot back there, and you're thinking, what is this kid up to? What's he doing? What's he gonna do with it? He's a little chubby kid standing there watching Jesus. Who knows what's in his lunch bucket besides the bread and the fish? You don't know what that bread was sitting up against when Jesus is breaking it and passing it out. But, he's a little kid, right? And the issue for Jesus, this is the big deal. The issue wasn't what would Jesus use, but who would Jesus use? That's what it come down to. He's got all these big adults. These guys know stuff. Some of them are business owners. They own their own fishing business and all the stuff. You got a tax collector. He knows money. You've got all kinds of stuff. These guys, they collectively got their act together. They know stuff. Not a one of them could see in their mind's eye what God would do. But Jesus already knew what he'd do, and he knew who he was going to choose. Hey, buddy, I want you. Can you come and help me with this little thing? We're going to show the big boys how it's done, and you get to be a part of it. And the little kid steps up, and all he does is offer what he has. That's all he does. See, the lie of the devil is God doesn't want what I have to give. Oh, yes, he does. Because it never was about what you have to give. It's always, always about you. It's always about you. It doesn't matter what you have to give. It doesn't matter how big and special and good it is or how small and insignificant it might be to anybody. All you got is one dried out, flattened frog. God can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to turn that into bread and watch these people chow it down. You know, I mean, he can do anything. But the most important thing then that you and I should take from that is God chooses you. He chose you. 39 years ago, I'm driving down the road here. I didn't even know most of you. If not, well, I did know Gary and Barb Wheeler. Beyond that, and I knew my wife. Beyond that, I don't think I knew anybody else here. But I'll tell you what, there's one who knew you, and he chose you for a time such as this. And he's not in the business of saying, okay, now I don't know what I'm going to do. I chose you guys because I'm hoping you can pull it off. Oh, no, no, no. He chose you because he's going to pull it off through you. It's not what you bring to the table that matters. It's just come to the table, and he will use whatever you got. Well, God, the only thing I got is one little flattened frog. Great, we'll use that. It doesn't matter. Well, God, I got all kinds of things. I got silver and gold. Well, okay, fine. We really don't need it, but bring it anyway. We'll do whatever we got to with whatever we got. It just doesn't matter. He chooses you. And I want you to hear God say it this morning to you, because some of you are discrediting yourself. Some of you have listened to the lie of the devil who would say to you, too messed up, too broken, too many things lacking, too many things gone bad. And God says, you're a prime candidate. I choose you. And Northbridge is born, and he's born on people of faith who would just simply say, God, I got very little here. I'm just a little kid with a couple of loaves and fish, and it's all I got. Fine, that's it. Just come and bring what you got. I choose you. And a miracle comes out of that. Wouldn't it be cool to know that for the rest of your lives, you're going to have a story to tell? A story of the miracle working power of God, because God chooses you. Chooses you. And he's not done yet. He's not done yet. We are so small-minded. We think that, okay, I know we got enough to do this, God. 5 loaves, 2 fish. We pull that off. We probably can feed that Peter over there, but that's about it. You know, no. God says, no, we're going to feed 5,000. We're going to feed 5. With what? How are we going to do it? We ain't got enough land here to do that. We haven't got enough money to do that. We haven't got enough gifts to do that. We haven't got enough. What are you talking about? God will choose the least among us to do the most. God chooses you. Just bow your heads with me, would you? When you consider your own life, I want you just to think for a moment. Every step of your life hasn't always been easy. Been really pretty rugged at times. Oh, even at my age and 45 years of pastoring, how many times I can look and say, God, I am a hopeless individual. There's no way you're going to fulfill vision through this person I am, because I fail, I goof up, I just too many things have gone difficult, and I don't know, God. And God will say, hey, I chose you. I chose you, and I'm not done yet. Just be willing to give whatever you got, and I'll use it. Right here today, those of you, some of you, you're where your walk with the Lord is. Maybe it's you need to say yes to Jesus right here. I'm going to assume that probably most of you, if not all of you, have at some point already said yes to Jesus. And maybe the road hasn't been as smooth as you'd like to be. It never is. Doesn't matter what people tell you. It just isn't. Jesus prophesied it. He says, I experienced trouble. You're going to experience trouble. James was clear. He said, you're going to have your faith tested. There's no question about it. It happens. Mine has been numerous times. Your willingness to simply trust him in what he says, it's going to get tested. It's going to get tested. But if you'll just stick around close by his side, there's that day coming when he's going to look at you and he's saying, I choose you. And when he does, you're going to be on the front end of a miracle. A miracle. And we'll be rejoicing, and you'll be telling people for the rest of your life. You'll become a living testimony because God chooses you. He does. Just take your hands and hold them out in front of you. I don't often do these kinds of things because I'm just a farm boy and I'm pretty simple, and sometimes I know preachers do these kinds of things, and I think, come on, it's just silly, and that's not me. And and I'm not only a farm boy, I'm an American farm boy, and just don't tell me what to do. I'll do what I want to do when I want to do it. And that silliness of me gets in the way sometimes. And so I want to invite you just to eliminate the silliness of who we are, and for a moment, not just because the preacher tells you to, but just trust God enough to do what maybe God might be saying to you through the preacher. And hold out your hands in front of you. They're empty. I've got nothing there. And that's the way I come to Jesus. Empty with nothing. But whatever he can find there, he can have. I give it to you. Jesus, to this very day, after all these years, I still hold these hands. And in my mind, they're pretty empty. There's not a lot there. But God, some reason, you said, Gary, I need you. I want you. And so, Lord, here it is. It's all I got. I got nothing else. You know me. You know my failures. You know my weaknesses. You know how, Lord, I wish I was much better than I am for you. And yet I trip over myself. But you still say, I got you. I got you. Just bring what you got. Lord, today you see us here. I pray that you would help the folks here to hear that you have chosen them, and that, Lord, you will do something great if they just bring to you a willingness to give to you whatever they got, and you, Lord, will bless them back. I know it. It might be an eternity. It's been 39 years since I had a vision for this property. It might be eternity before some of us see all that you have spoken to our hearts. But this I know, you are faithful, and your word does not return void. Lord, thank you for choosing us. In Jesus' name.